There was a time, not so long ago, when my house was never quiet. Every weekend, sometimes even on weekdays, the lights were on, the doors were open, and the sound of voices filled every corner. Laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses, the smell of food drifting from the kitchen into the living room. It all looked like the kind of life people admire from the outside. If you had walked past my home back then, you might have thought to yourself that this must be a good man, a lucky man, a man surrounded by people who care about him. And for a long time, I believed that too. I thought a full house meant a full heart. I thought the more people I welcomed in, the richer my life would become. But what I did not understand, not then, was that a crowded house can still feel empty when the people inside it are not truly there for you. Come a little closer and sit with me for a moment, because I can see something in you that reminds me of who I used to be. There is a certain kind of tiredness that does not come from working long hours or carrying heavy things. It settles deeper than that. It shows up in the way your shoulders rest, in the way your eyes linger just a second too long, like you are carrying something invisible that never quite leaves you alone. That kind of exhaustion comes from giving too much of yourself to people who only know how to take. It comes from always being the one who says yes, even when everything inside you is quietly asking for rest. It comes from wanting to be appreciated so badly that you keep offering more, hoping that one day it will finally be enough. I used to live exactly like that. I believed that being a good man meant being available to everyone. If someone needed a place to gather, my house was open. If someone needed a meal, I would cook. If someone needed help, I would show up without hesitation. I told myself that this was kindness, that this was what it meant to have a good heart. And maybe part of that was true. But there is a difference, a quiet but important one, between giving from a place of strength and giving until there is nothing left inside you. Back then, I did not know how to tell the difference. I had this idea in my head that love and respect could be earned through consistency, through generosity, through always being the one people could rely on. I thought if I kept my doors open long enough, if I made people feel comfortable enough, if I gave them enough reasons to stay, they would eventually see me, not just what I provided, but me as a person. So I built a life around that belief. My home became the place where everyone gathered. Birthdays, casual dinners, celebrations that did not need a reason, I hosted them all. I would spend hours preparing everything, making sure the food was good, the house was clean, the atmosphere felt warm. I took pride in it. I told myself that this was what a meaningful life looked like. And for a while it felt that way. The rooms were full, the conversations were lively, and there was always someone around. But when the night ended and the last guest walked out the door, something would shift. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It felt heavy, almost like the house itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I would stand there among the empty glasses and half-finished plates, and instead of feeling fulfilled, I felt strangely alone. I ignored that feeling for a long time. I convinced myself it was just part of being tired, part of hosting, part of life. There was one man in particular who was always there. Let us call him Daniel. He had a way of showing up early, making himself comfortable, and staying long after everyone else had gone. On the surface, he seemed friendly, easy to talk to, the kind of person who could blend into any group. But if you paid attention, really paid attention, you would notice the small things. The way he rarely offered to help, the way he would make subtle remarks about the food or the setup, the way he carried himself like everything around him existed for his convenience. I noticed those things, of course I did, but I chose to overlook them. I told myself that nobody is perfect, that focusing on small flaws would make me ungrateful. Looking back now, I realize those small moments were not small at all. They were signs. Quiet signals that something was out of balance. But when you are used to putting others first, you learn to silence that inner voice that tries to warn you. You start to believe that discomfort is normal, that feeling unappreciated is just the price you pay for being a good person. And so I kept going. I kept opening my doors, setting the table, filling the house with people, hoping that the feeling inside me would eventually change. Then came a night I cannot forget, no matter how many years pass. It was late in the winter, and I had not been feeling well for a few days. My body was tired, my head felt heavy, and there was a dull ache in my bones that made even simple movements feel like effort. A part of me knew I should have canceled that evening, should have stayed in, should have taken care of myself for once. But the thought of disappointing everyone felt heavier than the sickness itself. So I pushed through. I told myself it would be fine, that once people arrived, the energy of the room would carry me through the night. I remember standing in the kitchen, preparing everything as I always did, moving a little slower than usual but still determined to make it all come together. The house began to fill, voices rising, laughter spreading from room to room. From the outside, it probably looked just like every other gathering. But inside, I was struggling to keep up. My hands felt unsteady, my focus drifted, and there was a quiet part of me that just wanted to sit down and rest. At some point during the evening, I was carrying a tray across the room when my grip slipped. It happened so quickly that I did not even have time to react. The tray tilted, a glass fell, and then another, and suddenly there was a sharp crash as everything hit the floor. The sound cut through the room, silencing the conversation in an instant. For a brief moment, everything stood still. I looked down at the broken glass scattered across the floor, the liquid spreading slowly, reflecting the light above. Then I looked up at the people around me. There were more than a dozen of them, all sitting comfortably, all watching. And in that moment, something became painfully clear. No one moved. Not a single person stood up to help. A few shifted in their seats, careful not to get too close to the mess. Someone made a comment about being careful. Another asked if there were more drinks. The conversation began to pick up again, as if nothing important had happened. I stood there, feeling the weight of that moment settle deep inside my chest. It was not just about the glass, or the mess, or even the lack of help. It was about what it revealed. All those people who had filled my house, who had eaten my food, who had enjoyed my effort, they were not there for me. They were there for what I provided. And the moment I needed something, even something small, there was nothing in return. That realization did not come like a sudden shock. It came quietly, almost gently, like a truth that had been waiting patiently for me to finally notice it. In that instant, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. I had mistaken being needed for being valued. I had built my life around making myself useful, thinking it would earn me a place in people's hearts. But usefulness is not the same as respect, and it is certainly not the same as love. I cleaned up the mess that night, just as I had cleaned up everything else before it. The evening continued, people stayed, conversations flowed, and eventually they all left. But something inside me had shifted, and there was no going back to the way things were before. For the first time, I allowed myself to sit with the truth instead of pushing it aside. I began to see my house, my habits, and the people around me through a different lens. And once you see something clearly, you cannot unsee it. It took me a long time to understand the full weight of that lesson, but it started there, on that quiet winter night, standing in the middle of a room full of people who suddenly felt like strangers. And as I stood there, I realized that the problem was not just them. It was me. I had opened the door so wide that I never stopped to ask who truly deserved to walk through it. That night stayed with me long after the house grew quiet again. I remember sitting alone in the dim light, the air finally still, no voices left to fill the space, and for the first time in years, I did not rush to clean everything right away. I just sat there and let the silence speak. It was uncomfortable at first, almost unfamiliar, like meeting an old part of myself I had ignored for too long. But within that silence, there was also a kind of clarity I had never allowed myself to feel. It was as if all the noise I had surrounded myself with had been drowning out something important, something honest, something that had been trying to reach me for years. I began to think back on all those gatherings, all those moments I had once taken pride in. I replayed them in my mind, but this time I paid attention to the details I used to overlook. The conversations that revolved around everyone else's needs, the way I would move from one person to another making sure they were comfortable, the way I rarely sat down long enough to simply exist in my own home. I realized I had not been a host sharing a space. I had been a caretaker maintaining an experience. And in doing so, I had quietly removed myself from the very life I was trying to build. There is something we are taught from a young age, though it is rarely said out loud. We are taught that being a good person means being agreeable, accommodating, and endlessly giving. We are praised for our generosity, admired for our patience, and often measured by how much we are willing to sacrifice for others. And over time, if we are not careful, we begin to tie our worth to those things. We start to believe that the more we give, the more valuable we become. But what no one tells you is that there are people in this world who will gladly accept everything you offer without ever stopping to ask what it costs you. That was the truth I had to face. Not everyone who walks into your life comes with the intention of building something meaningful with you. Some come because you make things easy for them. Some stay because you never ask them to give anything in return. And some do not even realize they are taking more than they give, because you have made it so comfortable for them to do so. When you never set a boundary, people assume there isn't one. When you never say no, they stop hearing the possibility of it. I used to think that if someone stayed, it meant they cared. Now I understand that staying is not the same as showing up. Someone can be physically present in your life and still be completely absent when it matters most. Real connection is not measured by how often people are around you, but by how they treat you when you are not at your best. It shows in the quiet moments, in the small gestures, in the willingness to give without being asked. And once you begin to see that difference, it changes everything. So I started to make changes, slowly at first. I did not wake up the next day and shut my doors to the world. That is not how real change happens. It begins with small decisions, quiet shifts in how you respond to things. The first time I said no to hosting a gathering, it felt strange, almost wrong. There was a part of me that expected disappointment, maybe even rejection. But something else happened instead. Some people did not even ask why. They simply moved on, found somewhere else to go, someone else to rely on. That alone told me more than any words ever could. Then there were those who questioned it, who seemed confused by the change. They were used to a version of me that was always available, always ready, always willing. When that version began to fade, it disrupted their expectations. And that is when I truly began to understand how much of our relationships are built on patterns. When you change your role, the dynamic shifts, and not everyone is comfortable with that. But discomfort is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it is a sign that something necessary is happening. As time went on, my house grew quieter. Fewer invitations were sent, fewer people stopped by, fewer nights were filled with noise. At first, that quiet felt unfamiliar, almost too still. I had spent so many years associating silence with loneliness that I did not know how to interpret it any other way. But slowly, something changed. The silence began to feel different. It became softer, warmer, more like a space I could finally breathe in. I started to notice things I had overlooked before. The way the light moved through the windows in the afternoon, the simple comfort of sitting without needing to entertain anyone, the peace of knowing that I did not have to perform just to feel accepted. And then something even more meaningful happened. The people who remained, the few who still came around, were different. not in who they were, but in how they showed up. They did not expect anything from me. They did not wait to be served or entertained. They brought something with them, not just in their hands, but in their presence. Conversations felt balanced, not one-sided. Time spent together felt mutual, not draining. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I had to earn my place in the room. I was simply part of it. That is when I understood the true meaning of what it is to have a place, to have a home, to have people in your life. It is not about numbers. It is not about how many chairs you can fill or how often your phone rings. It is about the quality of those connections, the respect that flows between you, the quiet understanding that you are valued not for what you do, but for who you are. And that kind of connection cannot exist where there are no boundaries. You see, a house is more than just walls and furniture. It is a reflection of your inner world. Who you allow inside, how you allow them to treat that space, says a great deal about how you see yourself. When I let everyone in without question, I was sending a message, not just to them, but to myself. I was saying that my time, my energy, my peace were not things to be protected. I was saying they were available to anyone who wanted them. And once I began to change that message, everything else began to shift with it. I stopped trying to convince people of my worth. I stopped over-explaining my decisions. I stopped feeling guilty for choosing rest over obligation. And in doing so, I discovered something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. You do not need to make yourself smaller or more accommodating to be loved. The right people will not require that of you. They will meet you where you are, not where it is convenient for them. There is also something important I want you to understand, something that took me years to accept. Letting people go does not always look dramatic. There are no grand speeches, no confrontations, no need to explain every detail. Sometimes it is as simple as stepping back, as simple as no longer reaching out, as simple as choosing not to open the door as often as you used to. It is a quiet kind of strength, the kind that does not seek attention but changes your life in ways that are deeply meaningful. And yes, there will be moments when you question yourself. Moments when the old habits try to pull you back, when the silence feels a little too loud, when you wonder if you made the right choice. That is part of the process. Growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels right. But if you stay with it, if you trust yourself enough to continue, you will begin to notice the difference. You will feel lighter. Your time will feel more like your own. Your energy will no longer be something that is constantly being depleted. These days, my house is not as full as it once was, but it is more honest. Every person who walks through my door now is someone I trust, someone who respects the space, someone who understands that being there is not a given, but a privilege we share with one another. We sit, we talk, we listen, and there is a balance that was never there before. No one is trying to take more than they give. No one is keeping score. It simply flows the way it should. And when the door closes at the end of the day, when the house returns to its quiet state, I no longer feel that heavy emptiness I used to carry. Instead, there is a calm that settles in, a sense of peace that stays with me. I have learned to enjoy my own company, to sit with my thoughts without needing distraction, to find comfort in the stillness rather than running from it. That, more than anything, has been the greatest change of all. So if you find yourself feeling the way I once did, always giving, always showing up, always making space for others while quietly neglecting yourself, I want you to consider something. Not everyone deserves a place in your home, in your life, or at your table. And that is not a reflection of your kindness. It is a reflection of your self-respect. You have every right to choose who you share your time with, who you open your door to, who you allow into your world. You do not need permission to protect your peace. You do not need approval to set boundaries. And you certainly do not need to prove your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply close the door, sit down in the quiet, and realize that everything you were looking for in others has been within you all along.